So welcome. This is the Tory Burch Foundation's Small Business Webinar Series, and today's session is titled Accessibility in Action. I'm Molly Heffernan, Director of Marketing for the Tory Burch Foundation, and I am so thrilled to be joined by two incredible guests today. First and foremost, we have Keeley Wells, disability rights activist and founder of C Talent, an award-winning talent management and consulting company representing high-profile deaf and disabled talent. C Talent's goal is to change the way the world views and defines disability. And Keeley is also a Tory Burch Foundation Fellow and just was with us in New York a few weeks ago. So we're so thrilled to have you back doing more with us. And then we also have Tiffany, CEO and founder of Disabilities, an award-winning, entirely disabled run and led social enterprise to elevate disability pride. You're a content creator with over 180,000 followers across platforms, three-time TEDx speaker, and has been named TikTok API Asian and Pacific Islander Trailblazer, a LinkedIn top voice in disability advocacy, and a well and good change maker. So, I mean, I have chills. We're just in the best hands possible for today's discussion. And today, Tiffany and Keeley are going to talk about how entrepreneurs can build accessibility into their businesses, recruit and support disabled employees. After their presentation, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A box and keep all that great community building in the chat. And today's session will be recorded and we'll be sending out resources and information in the post-webinar email. So if you miss something, that's okay. You'll be getting access to resources afterwards. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you both.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Molly. It is great to be here and great to be here with my good friend and colleague, Tiffany. So to kick us off, hi, I am Keeley. As a visual description, I am a white woman with long blonde hair wearing a black Nike sweatshirt, and behind me is a white wall. Visual descriptions are for those who are blind or low vision, and are also just for anyone who doesn't have access to the video content. So as Molly mentioned, I'm an entrepreneur and disability rights activist. I personally became disabled when I was 17 years old. When I moved to the USA, I ended up losing a job in the entertainment industry due to disability discrimination. So that is why I founded C Talent, and we specifically represent disabled talent, increasing disability representation within film, TV, and media. We grew very quickly and were acquired in 2022 by Whaler. And since I have founded Zeta, which is a learning experience platform enabling companies to create accessible credentialing education with the goal of getting more underrepresented talent employed. And with that, Tiffany, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Keeley. I'll also share a fun fact that I am represented by C Talent at Whaler as well. So to provide a brief visual description, I'm a Taiwanese American woman. I'm wearing like a pink satin type halter top. I felt like that was fitting of the Tory Burch Foundation. And I'm joining you from my apartment in Inglewood, California, which is close to Los Angeles. If we have any LA attendees, just put a 1 in the chat so we know that you're there and you're representing as well. And, you know, I'm going to share what I call my disability origin story. And Keeley shared hers at 17. And so for me, I acquired my disability at the age of 9. I was involved in a car accident. My dad was driving. He unfortunately passed away. And I acquired a slew of injuries, including permanently paralyzing one of my arms, and much later being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, about 22 years after the accident. So I share those. Not everyone owes you their disability origin stories. I share that to provide context that is the lens through which we are coming into this conversation. We weren't born with our disabilities. We also want to highlight they can happen at any age. Mine happened when I was young. Keeley's happened later in her teens. And because of that, you know, both of us are just really passionate about wanting to ensure that the worlds that we build and the type of work that we do is supporting and uplifting our community in whatever way we can. So I'm also just going to provide some descriptions of the slides as well. So this slide on here, it says who we are at the top, and then it has a photo of me and a headshot of Keeley as well.
So on-screen representation of disability has oftentimes been very limited and lacking in diversity, leading to a narrow understanding of what disability actually means. The World Health Organization reports that approximately 16% of the global population identifies as disabled. However, that number may be significantly higher because when you're considering individuals who have mental illness, such as depression, other conditions like epilepsy, chronic illnesses like autoimmune diseases, and other conditions that fall under the umbrella of disability. Unfortunately, due to the stigma and the fear of disclosure, so many people choose not to openly identify as disabled, contributing to the underrepresentation of disability in society. So I personally think that a substantial portion of the population is disabled, and I think it's actually closer to 50% of the population. So it's really crucial when we think about our work to broaden the perspective on what disability is and work to creating a more inclusive and accepting society that recognizes the diverse experiences of all people. Disability results from the intersection between individuals with health conditions such as cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, depression, and also personal and environmental factors, including negative attitudes, inaccessible transportation, and public buildings and limited social support. It's also important to avoid making assumptions, especially when it comes to what disabled people can or cannot do. As someone personally with an invisible or also called hidden disability, I frequently encounter comments suggesting that I don't appear disabled or that I am exploiting the system when I use disabled facilities. An example of this is when I use the bus and I need to sit down and I'm using the disabled seat on the bus, I'm often told that I don't look disabled or that I'm just taking advantage of the system. And similarly, when I use the disabled bathroom, I am always given horrible looks. I'm told that I'm making it up. And that is something called ableism, which we will touch on more in a bit. So it is extremely powerful to believe and validate people when they share their experiences. And in addition, making all of your workspaces as accessible as possible, as you never know who might need them. And as we just mentioned, the underrepresentation of disability and people having that fear to disclose, you never know who's disabled. So I also believe personalization in the workforce is the future of work to make things more productive. So as business owners, we must challenge assumptions and biases about disability and recognize that even if you do not explicitly see them, you do have disabled consumers, you do have disabled employees, and you do have disabled people around you. So when you're thinking about your internal teams, think about how you can create an accessible space. A small example of this, and something that I do to create a more inclusive environment, is before every meeting, no matter who it's with, if I've had a meeting with them before, if it's someone new, if it's someone on my team, I end my email and I say, do you have any access requirements for the call or the meeting? And if you're sending a document, you can ask the same thing. Do you have any access requirements? Let me know and I can create an alternative format. It's a really simple way to just create a more accessible environment. So before we jump further into the future and looking at the now, it's important to recognize the history and how history has shaped the way that we think about disability. And there is something called the models of disability, which helps us explain disability and view disability in certain ways. So in the past, disability has been viewed as a personal problem that needs to be fixed by medical professionals. This is known as the medical model of disability. It is problematic and it puts the emphasis on disabled people being the problem and saying that they need to be cured or fixed in order to be respected and valued in society. And then we have something called the charity model of disability. This portrays disabled people as helpless and dependent on others for survival. And fun fact, the term handicapped, its thought actually originates from this when disabled people had to beg on the streets for money and have a cap in their hand and have people put money in that cap. So then we move along further into modern day and we have something called the social model of disability. And this is the only model of disability that has been developed by disabled people for disabled people. It was developed to remove societal barriers that prevent full participation in society. And it emphasizes that it is society that is the problem, not our medical conditions that make people disabled. And it also provides a solution. Judy Heumann, an incredible disability rights activist who is also represented by C Talent, who very sadly passed away recently, she played a significant role in advancing the social model of disability by implementing anti-discrimination policies for disabled people. And as we say, according to this model, disability is not something that solely exists within an individual, but instead it is created by our attitudes, the behaviors, and the social structures of society. So then we have the identity model. The identity model acknowledges that medical interventions may be necessary for some disabilities, but also argues that the medical model alone is not sufficient in addressing the full range of challenges disabled people. It also gives us pride and community and culture. And someone told me that you can be proud of being disabled and still have a complicated relationship with your medical conditions. And for me, that was game-changing.
Yeah, so I think to continue the conversation around the different models, I'd love to invite our attendees after that overview, think about, I guess, your interactions or the exposure that you've had to the disability community and how it has been framed potentially through one of those lenses before. So have you seen disability kind of only represented as this medical diagnosis, this individual person's problem that they have to go and get treatment for? Have you seen disability viewed through a charity tragedy lens where our lives are seen as so tragic? The expectations are set very low. It's okay if we don't have a job or don't have aspirations or dreams. And so I think you can use that as a point of reference as you think about your own starting point of how you want to move forward in your own disability inclusion journey. So this slide is honing in a little bit more on the social model of disability. So the text on here says, a way of viewing the world developed by disabled people. The model says that people are disabled by barriers in society, not by their impairment or difference. And so if you take away anything, and I'll probably say this a lot throughout this presentation, but the takeaway for me on this is that disability is not the problem, the inaccessibility is. Disability is not the problem, the lack of accommodations are. The disability is not the problem, ableism is. So the thing that needs to be fixed is the inaccessibility, the lack of accommodations, the ableism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I also want to highlight, Keeley, if you don't mind just going back to that first definition of disability. So we'll spend the first part kind of providing a little bit of context. We want to make sure we all have shared definitions. What I personally like about this definition of disability, this unfortunately is not the one in the dictionary. I did try to do some advocacy work a couple of years ago to get the definition updated to this. But what I appreciate about this is it highlights a definition of disability through the social model. So again, it says this interaction between someone who has a health or medical condition with personal and environmental factors like the negative attitudes, the inaccessibility, the lack of access to building, and the attitudes, again, the negative attitudes and the limited social support that is available that creates this disability experience. So let's move back forward in the slide. I've never done a tag teaming before, so we are figuring this out on the fly. And I also want to provide just a little bit more information around the difference between disability rights, disability inclusion, and disability justice. So you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm a disability rights advocate, or I'm a disability justice advocate, and there's a difference between those two. So disability inclusion is this broad term to describe approaches to advance access and inclusion for disabled people. So a lot of times, if you are working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, a lot of your work is centered around disability inclusion. Where disability justice kind of takes the disability rights movement and disability inclusion a little bit further is that disability justice centers the priorities and approaches of those most historically excluded groups, such as women, people of color, immigrants, and people who identify as LGBTQIA+. So disability justice to me is really centered on collective liberation. And I know we say that a lot, but for me, it's this idea that we have all of these intersecting identities encapsulated in our one human body, in our one experience. And how can we also show up not only in solidarity for other communities that don't look like our own, but also better understand the ways that our disability experiences are impacted by these different intersections. And on here is a photo. My hair was much longer at the time. I have since donated it, but I'm wearing like some leisure wear, I guess I would say. And the color is San Francisco fog. So let's go to the next slide. So and I apologize, I got distracted by the chat. So to talk a little bit more about disability and intersectionality, this slide says, remember and recognize intersectionality in your work and when you hire, and that people can belong to multiple marginalized groups, and their experiences of oppression are shaped by the interplay of these identities rather than just a single axis of oppression. So one thing I wanted to share about my own experience and the way that disability intersectionality comes into play is that I'm the daughter of Asian immigrants. And and I did a lot of research on this last month because it was Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. But one of the things that I learned is the cultural nuances of what it means to be Asian and be disabled. So one example of that is that everything in an Asian cultural context is viewed in the context of the family. So if someone is seen as disabled, it's seen as some wrongdoing in the lineage of the family, and everyone in the household is shamed. So the way that manifested for me was that I was involved in this car accident, and because the fact that my dad had passed away, I now had an apparent disability, and the fact that there was a car accident, it was seen as there was something wrong that in our lineage that happened in our family. And so we shouldn't tell anyone about it for fear of being shamed. The other thing that also happens through an Asian cultural context is that mental health and mental illness are not viewed as disabilities. And so I had to unlearn a lot of that. And part of why I am so loud and proud about my disabilities, and if not proud, also sit in the struggle and the hard times as well, is because once I started to be vocal about what I need, once I started to be vocal, I started getting the support that I needed, not only better understanding the way that my PTSD manifests, also being able to, one thing that's helpful for me is like when people ask questions to put them in the chat so that you have both the vocal and a written version of the question. And so yeah, I think about this word liberation and collective liberation as well. And I think about my own personal liberation in terms of starting to better understand how those intersections and being the daughter of Asian immigrants really impacted my own self-image and my own self-view of being a disabled person, and then doing the work to unlearn that. Oh, and Keeley, I saw that you unmuted yourself, so I don't know if you wanted to add anything there.
Oh no, I love that. I love that. I was just thinking about the one of the questions that came up in the Q&A, and while we were talking on the subject of the social model, would love to touch on how that does affect language. And that's something that Tiffany's going to speak on right now, which is perfect timing. But I think to the question in the chat, which says, how do you feel about the change in the word disability? I've heard diverse abilities, and I'm unsure as to whether this would be preferred or if it's because of the person not being comfortable with the term disability.
Yeah, great. What a beautiful, thank you, Ashley. What a great segue into this slide. And here's a photo of me wearing a dress with a hat, with my LA hat. I call my fedora my LA hat. So we can't talk about disability without talking about language first. And I actually feel like that is the first, it's the first point of entry because if we're so uncomfortable with how we talk about disability or what words to use, then we end up not even having a conversation at all because we don't know what questions we can ask or what language we can use. So I wanted to share I kind of have like three categories of how I think about language. And then Keeley, if you wanted to add some context here about these bullets. So the first to me is you will hear people use, I'm a disabled person, or I'm a person with a disability. For me personally, I am fine with both of those as long as the word disability is used when talking about disabilities. So then that lends people to say, well, Tiffany, why is your company called Diversibility? Part of that is we incorporated and got a trademark. But also, I think at that time, when I started this, it was 2009. And I love that this third bullet kind of says terms that were considered acceptable are not anymore. And the word disability is being reclaimed by the disability community, where I think for a long time, we were living in what I call like a disability negative culture, where we had negative value judgment of this word and felt like we needed to use something else. So again, the TLDR, the too long didn't read, is when in doubt, use the word disability. If someone who is disabled tells you that they prefer different language to refer to their own disabilities, defer to their language. And to touch on the point why my company is called Diversibility, we wanted to showcase that disability is diversity and that disability is diverse. And interestingly enough, a student at Gallaudet, which is known as where a lot of students are deaf at this university in DC, I also went to school in DC, actually proposed it. And we have revisited potentially renaming it over time, but we also will always write, we always will tell people when referring to our company, it's a capital D, Diversibility. We'll often include that registered trademark, and and please, if you can, not to use that term in any other context. And then the third category is, and I think Keeley will touch on some of these bullets, but the third category I wanted to touch on is the way that we talk about disabilities. So sometimes I will hear people say, this person is suffering from their disability, or they accomplished all these things despite their disability, or they overcame their disability. And I've seen all three of these in reference to me personally. With overcoming, I'm still disabled. And so what I potentially have overcome is I've overcome adversity. I'm not suffering from my disability. And also this is very specific because I do think that some disabilities are dynamic and people experience a lot of pain. I unfortunately don't. So I live with my disability. I'm learning how to navigate living with them. And then when, sometimes we see these media headlines that say, this person accomplished this thing in spite of their disability, I often will go back and say, hey, I accomplished this thing while living with my disability or with my disability. I can't diminish the fact that my disability experience has impacted all of the things that I do.
I love this topic. Love that. I think for me too, it's interesting. When I came out of hospital and I was experiencing the world in a different way, the light bulb went off for me of like, oh yeah, I am a disabled person because I am disabled by society. And for me, that term and using identity first language of disabled person is really a political act, and saying also, this is how we change things. This is how we create a solution and make the world a better place, is by creating an accessible society, because it is society, whether it's attitudes, communication, physical infrastructure that disables us in many, many ways. I think too, as Tiffany was saying, the language it's so powerful, but it also can be a way in which we get wrapped up in the wrong things. So whilst I think it's also important to recognize everyone's personal preference, because it is so personal. If a disabled person is using certain language, don't correct them. It's their preference. It's so personal. But for me, I personally prefer identity first. And then I think also thinking of the term special needs, which is one that comes up a lot. I think I saw a quote on LinkedIn yesterday, as someone said, why are a non-disabled person's needs human and a disabled person's needs special? They're not. They're all human needs. So let's change that. Maybe it's not special education, maybe it's accessible education. I don't know. I think we can definitely get wrapped up in language. It is powerful, but we also must recognize that there are important subjects that we can use it as a jumping off point for.
Yeah, and one thing I like to say is just name the discomfort. Just say, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be using the right words, but I want to ask this question, or I want to have a conversation about this.
Absolutely. So when it comes to hiring, I think it's essential to appreciate the transferable skills that disability brings. As a disabled person and an entrepreneur, I quickly realized that all of the skills that I've had to use when going through misdiagnosis, being undiagnosed, hospital appointments, managing my condition, such as delegation skills, resilience, leadership, time management, because I often have to manage my energy as a chronically ill person. All of these skills are transferable to being an entrepreneur. So it again goes to not assuming what a disabled person can or cannot do, and also recognizing the power of being disabled and all of the skills that you gain from being a disabled person. And also, again, the social model of disability, which we will keep banging on about throughout this whole presentation, of once you bring down those barriers, then disabled people can participate fully and do their best work. So an example is someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, who require both captions and sign language interpretation. You're enabling, by providing those two things, you're providing them the way to work better and fulfill their potential. And I would again give a small tip: when you're working with an interpreter, always speak directly to the deaf person. Don't speak to the interpreter. When you're booking an interpreter, remember that you are the one that does not sign, so you are the one that needs the interpreter, therefore should be paying for that interpreter. I think that's often a common misconception, that it is the deaf person that should pay for that interpreter, but it is always you always the company or whoever it is should pay for that interpreter. So just a small tip there. Tiffany, anything to add to that?
No, I think this is great. So we're going to talk, now we're kind of transitioning, now that we've provided a bunch of context. We're going to transition into, I think a lot of the audience here are small businesses. We're going to share some stats and some things that you can do within your own businesses to really not only take your business to the next level, but also make your businesses more open to more customers as well. So this slide, it says the business of disability. The disability market is larger than China and is emerging as other markets have in the past. 1.85 billion people and $1.9 trillion in annual disposable income. So as Keeley mentioned, about 16 to 17% of the world's population identifies as disabled. There are probably more of us out there than you think. I know Keeley talked about non-apparent disabilities. About 62 to 70% of disabilities are not apparent. So for example, if I showed up here and you didn't know that my arm was paralyzed, I'm still living with my mental health disability. And so I wanted to highlight this stat of the $1.9 trillion in annual disposable income. We want to be your customers. We want to buy your things. But if we aren't able to access them in one way or another, then you're missing out on a large potential pool of customers.
So I love this slide. So on this slide, you will see a toothbrush, a phone with text messages, and a potato peeler. So what do all of these have in common? Well, all of them were inspired by disabled people. So for instance, Sam Farber, who founded OXO, when he saw his wife, Betsy, having trouble holding her potato peeler due to arthritis, peeling her potato due to arthritis, he came up with the potato peeler. And SMS texting was discovered by someone in a pizzeria in Copenhagen and was created to help and be able to communicate with deaf people. So, but SMS texting, as we all know, has turned into this global, worldwide, just changed the world when it comes to all things cellular communications. So as you can see, accessibility is a creative opportunity. And when you're thinking about businesses, rather than looking at accessibility as this problem that needs to be solved, look at it as this opportunity to be had. Access sparks innovation, and it is essential to all of our daily lives. Many people are also afraid of becoming disabled, but I think little do they know, they're likely more afraid of becoming disabled because of the inaccessible world that we live in, rather than the disability itself. And this also goes into curb cuts, which I will let Tiffany explain.
Yeah, so this is known as the curb cut effect, which to me is when you design with a disability in mind, you actually are able to make things better for everyone. And so there are a couple other examples of like audiobooks, like how many of you listen to audiobooks? Put a 1 in the chat. That was actually inspired by disabled people. Like, look at all these audiobook lovers in here. And so the slide says the curb cut effect describes how addressing disadvantages or exclusions experienced by one group of people creates an environment that enables everyone to participate and contribute. Also, the trackpad on your computer. How many of you have a trackpad on your computer? Put a 2 in. We'll do the 1s and the 2s. But the curb cut effect, this was, I believe this was in the 70s. Ed Roberts, who is known as the father of the disability rights movement, and a bunch of his friends went and they cut cuts into the curb because they couldn't get onto the sidewalk. And what they realized was that once they were able to access the sidewalk, they were wheelchair users. They realized that people with packages, heavy package delivery people, strollers, you know, for me, I love wheels on my luggage because I can't carry around lots of big things, like being able to bring my luggage onto the sidewalk. And fun fact, wheels weren't added to luggage until airports became accessible. And so there's also a stat out there, because now we're kind of moving into the design, like the types of products that you're creating. There's a stat out there that says about 75% of disabled employees believe that they have an idea for their company that would add to their bottom line. And so, as Keeley said, accessibility creates innovation. Disability also creates innovation as well, because the way we've had to quote unquote life hack our way through is able to create solutions that my hope is not only are beautiful and functional, but also beautifully designed.
And this goes perfectly into the conversation of website accessibility, which I know is and can be a big issue and topic for small businesses. So the first thing I will mention is be aware of any solutions out there which use AI and claim to be a quick solution. AI right now is a tool, but it is not a solution. And it's extremely limiting in what it can do for accessibility. An example is auto captioning, for instance. Imagine you are using the auto captioning solely and it's spelling people's names wrong. It's getting the grammar wrong. It is not capturing everything that's being said, and you end up missing very important information. So it really is a myth that you can rely on AI for all of your accessibility needs. As AI evolves and develops and continues to get better, I'm excited to see what it can do for accessibility, but for right now, it is not a solution. And there are apps out there like Accessiby, AudioEye, UserWay to avoid those like the plague. They may be selling themselves as full-blown solutions, but unfortunately, they do not create an accessible and inclusive environment for disabled people. So a few quick tips that I would say.
Can I just add something on there?
Please do.
So these are known as like accessibility overlays, where the company will say, hey, you just download this plugin. And while I will acknowledge that it's a start, there's actually a New York Times article that came out that said, for blind users, the solution is often worse than, and it's talking about these different overlays. And I'll go find that while Keeley runs through this. But I also wanted to share that one of those companies has raised $50 million. And this is an example where someone assumes what a disabled person needs. develops a solution, they go tell other people, they think it's a great idea. They get millions. You know, even if they raise 1 million, that's a lot. I'm sure a lot of disabled entrepreneurs would love that. $50 million for a solution that actually doesn't help a lot of disabled people. That to me kind of just shows the disconnect between access to funding, great ideas, and yeah, the fact that we're making assumptions about what we think disabled people need rather than asking us and getting entrenched in the community.
Absolutely. So I think a few ways that you can really understand and recognize the needs of disabled users with your website is, first and foremost, talk to them. Talk to your disabled customers, find experts and consultancies that focus on accessibility and disability representation and all things disability. And one quick kind of disclaimer there, I would say, whilst it is also incredibly important that you do speak directly to your disabled customers and find out what they need and survey them, it is also important that you don't rely on them to educate you around disability and accessibility, that you use experts within accessibility and disability, because they're the ones that, and make sure those experts and those consultancies that you're using are disabled led and are disabled themselves. So a few other ways is watch videos of people using assistive technology to get an understanding of how assistive technology is used, how it may be used for your website. Learn about color contrast. There's a resource that we've linked at the end of this deck where you can quickly check how good your color contrast is. And also just know the basic for writing practices and for online, for the web. Don't forget to write image descriptions and alt text. And I always say with social media to write both alt text. Now you have the function in Instagram and LinkedIn to write alt text, which is great, but also write image descriptions. Image descriptions are slightly different from alt text. You're able to give a little bit more information and context around what the image or video is. And it's also, it doesn't live within that alt text function. You can write it just in your post. And that will enable people who don't have access to screen readers or who don't have access to assistive technology to also be able to benefit and understand what that image is that you've put out there. And then also learn how to navigate a website with your keyboard. So a well-constructed website makes all actions possible solely using tab or shift and tab to move backwards, space, enter, and the arrow keys. So when you're doing this, the site visually shows where you are on the page with focus styles. So there's a few really simple ways that you can understand your website and understand how disabled users may use it. Tiffany, anything else to add on websites?
Yeah, so I want to go back to your first tip, which was to talk to disabled people, and someone in the chat wrote, what if we don't know any people who have XYZ disability? So one interesting thing, so Diversibility, we call ourselves like the disability employee resource group that exists outside of a company. And we get requests sometimes, which are like, hey, we're looking for an authenticity reader for our book. They need to be a wheelchair user and also use communication devices to speak. We found someone for them. And so if it's okay, and I turn to the Tory Burch Foundation, we run a free Facebook group that you're welcome to join. We also have a premium option more focused on disability leadership. But like Keeley and I have built huge communities where we are in the community, we're networked. Whoever you're looking for, I trust we can find it. And I'll also share one other tidbit. We host events every single month. And one time we were looking at a potential partnership, and it was a mortgage lending company. And I thought about it and I said, are we able to find panelists who have different disabilities, who have different experiences with owning a home? And I call these I call these like disability 2.0 level conversations, where we're not just doing this one is like a little bit more one-on-one, but the 201 is, what are the daily life experiences that we have dehumanized disabled people out of, like owning a home, you know? And so we were able to find people who who own their home or had owned their home or inherited their home, and all different experiences. So just like any other community, again, tying back to our name, Diversibility, we are extremely diverse. And so if you're looking to connect with specific members of the community, feel free to join the Diversibility community, our Facebook group, or whatever your preferred platform is. If it's LinkedIn or TikTok, the search features on those platforms are becoming so much better that you could search and potentially find who your target customer is. And I'll share one other example too, which is I recently got invited to speak for a jewelry related client. And I have an upper extremity disability, which means putting on necklaces or navigating studs on earrings and different things like that. Those are very specific to me. And so when I tell people, actually, we're veering a little bit away from website accessibility, so I will revisit that on our last slide, but we're almost at the end. But yeah, in terms of website accessibility, ask the community and there are definitely like some great resources out there who do website audits and stuff like that. Yeah.
Amazing. And super quick too, I wanted to mention the importance of including disabled people in your marketing. Disabled people can be incident, even if your product is not directly a disability specific product or specifically targeted to the disabled community, you can include disabled people in all of your marketing. You can use them incidentally because just remember, disabled people are entrepreneurs, mothers, fathers, your best friend, business people. They will most likely be using your product. So always include them in your marketing. And I would really want to get to Q&A. So I'm going to quickly jump on this point of reasonable accommodations versus access requirements, which we touched on in the beginning pretty quickly. And it just goes around, under the law, under the ADA, we have reasonable accommodations. But I personally, within my business, I use the term access requirements because that means that you're not just doing a nice thing, you're not just accommodating someone, you're not just doing it out of courtesy. Access requirements really means you have to. It is important, it is necessary. And it also makes disabled people feel like they're not a burden for having to ask for any additional effort or ask for anything additional. It is their requirement and their right to access. So just think about the way that you can pivot the way you position, the way that you work with your employees. So some quick things and takeaways that you can do is conduct an access audit with disabled people, train your staff on disability etiquette, working with disabled consultants to do that, prioritize access requirements, foster a culture of inclusion, intersectionality, and remember to always add disability to your definition of diversity. Provide accessible communication options and include disabled people in your marketing campaigns. So with that, would love to start answering some of the questions in the Q&A.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much. And in the interest, I'm going to dive right in because so many good questions have come in. I think first and foremost, a question that we get a lot, I'd imagine you all get a lot, is especially from that small business perspective, what are those first steps a small business owner can take to make sure that their products, their environments meet standards, especially when budget is a concern? And I've noticed today you've all modeled several things that require absolutely zero budget, and it's like a shift in mindset. Can you just expand a little bit more upon that so that we can all walk away feeling equipped to kind of start making changes even, in a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. I can jump in. As you say, accessibility is a mindset, and creating that environment of access and inclusion and culture, it really is being flexible, even with mental health, for instance. People have started providing mental health days and being more open with flexible schedules. And I think even now we're seeing companies forcing people back into the office. And unfortunately, that again is hindering the inclusion of disabled people. We saw throughout the pandemic an increase in disability representation within the workforce because disabled people have been fighting for years to have remote work as an option. For me personally, I had to work in person in London for a while, and I would waste all of my energy and all of my, we call them spoons in the chronic illness community, just getting to work. And then I wasn't able to fully participate in the work. I wasn't able to do my best work. So working from home for many people can be game changing. And that is just one of the things that you can do to make accessibility a reality within your business.
Mm-hmm. I think that really lends itself well to this question that came in from Catherine. And I mean, you two are the best people to answer this. So how can disabled entrepreneurs navigate supporting their own needs as they design and build a business and launch a company, whether that's from budget, staffing, tools, insurance? Like what are the secrets you all have?
This is Tiffany. I don't know if I have any secrets per se, but this is also why I wanted to build a company that was entirely disabled led and run. We've gotten as big as 10, that's still small. Now we're at 8. But for a long time, we only operated as 2 people. So as we continue to grow, we were able to grow our team as well. But we wanted to show that disability employment works. You know, everyone we're a remote first company. Everybody has flexible hours. I know there was a question about a fear of losing your Social Security benefits. A couple of our team members are on benefits, and we work with them to ensure their hours and their pay rates ensure that they can stay on their benefits as well. But yeah, I think for me, part of why I became an entrepreneur is because I wanted more flexibility in my schedule. I felt like I always hid behind my work or my 9 to 5 or whatever those hours were as to why I wasn't taking care of myself.
Yeah. And I would also quickly mention too, I think it's really easy for entrepreneurs in general to fall into that hustle culture and that grind and that working 24/7. That is not sustainable for any entrepreneur, let alone a disabled entrepreneur. So you don't compare yourself to other people, don't fall into that hustle culture. And you became an entrepreneur and a founder most likely because you wanted that flexibility. So remember the reasons why you started your business.
I will also add too, I work from my bed. I call it my bed desk. Like, it doesn't matter where you work or how you work. You know, like for me, I always focus on, at least for our team, you know, and we haven't done everything right, but are you getting the things done that you said that you were going to do? I'm not as involved in how you got there or what needed to happen, but it got done. And I started my career in investment banking, which is, you know, it's very demanding hours, but I knew that starting at 8 p.m., people wouldn't bother me as much. I wouldn't have as many calls. And so whenever I was in that particular workplace, I would ask like, okay, great, you want this deck or this model, this financial model done by, or you want this done, can we have a check-in at like 9 a.m. the next morning? Because I knew I was going to take as much time as I needed to do to get the thing done that needed to get done in my own way.
Mm-hmm. All of the advice you all shared is just so great, you know, really anchoring and like put in what you want to get out of this company, lead with your values. It's so important. So a follow-up question, I think to what was touched on earlier from one of the questions in the chat, it really wondering here, what if we don't know or have even sort of a pulse, right, about what disabilities our customers may or may not have? How can we think about best serving them first? Like, you want to invest in something first. How do you do that pulse check? Should you, I think everyone's kind of wondering what's the best way to start and serve the people who need me to serve them first.
I would say when it comes to thinking about designing for everyone, just in general, think about universal design. Universal design is a way of creating an environment that is usable for everyone, no matter if your age, your gender, your disability, it's just good design. So first of all, I would say think of that. And second of all, I think when it comes to really small budgets and not necessarily being able to hire someone to rebuild your website, I mean, I think it is about, at some point you do have to remember that you will have to budget for accessibility. Yeah. That does have to be a line item. So when you're preparing your next set of budgets, when you're putting together an event, create a line item for accessibility, but also think about how it can be integrated within your marketing budget and your various different other budgets. Because even with social media, for instance, it is super easy, it is free. You can add captions, you can add image descriptions. It is not always complicated and expensive. Some things may be, but it doesn't always have to be.
Yeah. And I think today you have expertly dispelled this myth we so often hear. Well, I don't think that my customers are disabled. I don't think this, I don't think that. Well, you just showed us there's massive market opportunity. And if you build the right products, there is so much untapped potential. And so really everybody's business, it's a smart, not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also an incredibly smart business choice for all of the business owners on here.
Can I add two things?
Please,
I want to take Keeley's comment about universal design a little bit further and talk about inclusive design. So again, don't want to get fixated on language, but I personally am more excited about inclusive design because what it does is it creates a customer archetype. So I want to use the example of a watch. I can't put on watches in the same way that most people can.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a watch that was designed for blind users that was tactile, which it had little bumps on it, but I still couldn't put it on, right? And so for this particular company that was designing the watch for blind users, I'm not their target customer, but it's still inclusive design, right? So as you're building your company, thinking about like getting to know like everything about who that customer is, not just, oh, Tiffany, can't use one of her arms, but she likes wearing pink tops and she wears red lipstick and she wears big earrings. You want to create a whole like, I forget, like an archetype of who this person is. And there's this saying that when you design for one, you design for many, which I think leads into this universal design idea. But some people don't benefit from curb cuts, and that's okay. But it benefits a lot of other people as well. So the second example I wanted to share was about Clubhouse, which was this audio social networking app a little while ago. And that became really popular in 2021. And what I thought was so fascinating was that because the disability community was convening on this app, we actually had an inroad directly into their engineering and accessibility team, and were able to help push for, captions on some of the audio chats. There were even deaf users on there who shared how they were able to engage in it. They had a Google Meet open that was captioning it. And then everyone started saying, this is Tiffany, right when they started speaking, and then I'm done speaking, so that it would show up in the captions. But also for blind users, that was helpful as well. So I'm not as active on Clubhouse anymore, but I thought it was a great example of how we as a community wanted to engage, we wanted to connect, we wanted to be involved, and we were able to partner and potentially co-create an app that worked for many of us. And I will acknowledge also still didn't work for a lot of others, but hopefully they had other social media apps or other places and ways that they could connect with other people.
Yeah. And I think for all the other business owners on today, what Clubhouse modeled was an openness to hearing the community, implementing changes. And for all of us as, founders, would-be founders, leads of teams, it's having that openness to say, is there a way we can do this better? I want to jump into another question here. So as small business owners, how do you all, and how can everybody on support potential employees during the hiring and onboarding process, especially for disabled talent? How do you foster that space from day one?
I would say ask the questions. Do you have any access requirements? I will always be banging on about that one sentence. Do you have any access requirements? And if they say they do, and it's captioning, implement it. No questions asked. It's super easy. And then also, for future, oh, this benefits people, this is great. Now I can implement it, after. So ask the questions. You don't need to ask people, are you disabled? Do you have a disability? It's just always about their access requirements. And then I would also just say to the other point too, is disabled consumers and also disabled talent, we have been so chronically left out of so many spaces and not catered towards and not had the access, that when you do start to bring disabled people into your business and welcome them into your community and cater for them and serve them, they will be your most loyal customers and your most loyal employees, because you are finally creating a space that works for them. So it's worth bearing in mind.
Yeah. What are some of, oh, go ahead, Tiffany.
I was just going to add two things. So one is we have everyone fill out a guide to working with me. To me, that's my version of like asking people what their access requirements are. But on there, you can ask a couple questions like, when do you work best? You know, like, do you like calls, like access, different things like that. That's number one. And then number two, and I know this might not be doable for smaller companies, but when I started at the bank, every new hire had an ergonomic assessment done of our work area. And one of the things that I appreciated was not only can everyone find ways, you know, we were sitting at our desks all day, find ways to work better in the places that we're in. But by the time they came to me, and the ergonomic specialist, you know, I let her know about my injury. She proposed speech to text, if I would benefit from speech to text technology, which now with Zoom and captions here, or a tool called otter.ai, like those are also free tools as well. Like if I'm not able to type as much, I can talk it and then go and edit it. So those two, I think, at least in my own onboarding process, were really helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to try and get two last questions in. So a lot of what you all do is working, you know, with others, bringing people, brands along for the journey. And, you know, there was a great question in here, and I know that we have a lot of people either in this space or working on other sort of cause-related companies. How do you work differently in building your own company versus the way that you step into another brand and educate around access?
It's a great question. I mean, I think for us, so with C Talent, we were working with major brands like Savage X Fenty, with Target, with Walmart, with Nike, with so many big brands. And for us and our team, our work is rooted in disability rights, is rooted in inclusion, and we have a goal and a purpose beyond just making money. And you know, obviously that's a huge part of the importance of our work. But I think working with other brands, it's important to share what we do with them and the reasons why we do it. And we don't just do anything for a tick box, and making sure that these companies that we're working with have things in place where they're supporting their disabled employees, where they are actually doing the work. And Tiffany and the talent that we represent will oftentimes say no to working with a brand if they do not have, and they're not doing the right work. And I think it's really important to continue that integrity when you are working with big companies.
Certainly.
And this is Tiffany. I come back to this idea that hopefully we're all trying to co-create an experience that works for everyone together, right? And so I view this as like a co-creation, like a team thing of the brands or the companies that we have an opportunity to engage with, is that we want to do this better, but we're going to fumble along the way. And one of the things I say is like, I never want learning to be about shame. And so how can we learn and do this in a way like that works for you? And that's why I said, like, when Keeley shared the models of disability, maybe your mindset is still in one of the earlier models, and that's okay. We just need to know where the starting point is so that we know where we can go.
Yeah. And there's someone on LinkedIn called Meryl Evans who has a saying that says progress over perfection. And I think also because disability and language and the work, it's always evolving and always changing. So definitely striving for that progress is a great way to start.
Amazing. Well, I know that we could truly go on all day. There are so many questions. So, but what I would remind everybody here is that we are sending out resources after the session. You can rewatch this session, but also Keeley and Tiffany have put together an incredible wealth of resources. So if you want to action changes on your website, you want to think differently about captioning your social media. I mean, great nuggets today is, do you have any access requirements? And then Tiffany, you put in the chat the questions that you ask your team to ground you all in the way that you can work best together. These are such actionable steps that everyone can take. So we are just so grateful for both of you, your time today, your knowledge share. And I encourage everyone on today's session to, think about that. What is that first step you're going to take in making an adjustment to your business, and how can you do it like right after you walk off this call?